Welcome. My name is Robert Stirling and I'm the Deputy CEO here at NUAA. And today we are talking about providing inclusive AOD treatment for gender and sexuality diverse people. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we're all meeting on today and pay respects to elders past and present. For me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are participating in today's webinar. So today's webinar is a safe, non-judgmental space. Today we're talking about supporting inclusive practice. And so we're going to be talking about understanding the importance of using inclusive language about people from gender and sexuality diverse backgrounds. We're going to hear from the perspective of a service user and also a frontline worker to talk about some of the barriers and enablers. And we're going to explore approaches to having conversations about gender and sexuality and how it can be applied to AOD settings, including data collection. If anything comes up today that you'd like to talk to someone about, here are some contact details for you, and you might like to talk to your services EAP program. So it is a privilege for me today to share the screen with 5 women who make up today's panel. So we're going to go around and I'll ask each participant to let you know who they are and why this webinar is important to them.
Thanks, Robert. My name's Claire Allen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the National Program Manager for Pride in Health and Wellbeing, which is one of ACON's programs supporting organisations to become more LGBTQ inclusive. Today I'm calling in from Awabakal and Warramai lands up in Newcastle. And why is this webinar important to me? It's important because I'm really passionate about helping organisations make sure that they're providing the best care to LGBTQ consumers because of their persistent disadvantage in most mainstream care settings.
Hi everyone, my name's Holly. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I'm a poly queer femme who lives on the land of the Wongal people of the Eora Nation. So I've been offered lots of different psychiatric labels, but I prefer to identify as someone with big feelings or a highly sensitive person in an often insensitive world. And my experiences have been that psych drugs were not helpful enough for me to justify their side effects, and on the flip side my experience of so-called illicit drugs were that they were really effective at reducing my distress in the short term, and that the absence of many other distress tolerance skills, I found it hard not to take them more and more of the time, and because of relying on this one coping strategy all the time, it led to problems like decreasing effectiveness, legal and financial trouble, relationship challenges, and I found myself accessing drug health services in the community to try and find a way forward. So I'm the lived experience perspective, and this webinar is important to me because I'm passionate about the expansion of the lived experience workforce. I work as a mental health peer support worker and also as a lived experience academic, and I think I do this because I'm hungry for humanistic ways to understand my experiences and the intersections of the mental health, trauma and addiction. And it feels still really uncomfortable for me to talk publicly about my experiences as an AOD service user, but I think that my own internalized stigma is proof that we need more and more lived experience perspectives to challenge the discourse that drug use is due to brain disease or moral failing. So thanks for having me at the webinar party.
Hi guys, sorry about my voice. My name's Simone Angus. I'm the Programs Manager for Western Sydney for the Noffs Foundation. So we work with young people between the ages of 12 and 25. I think this webinar is really important, and I'm really excited to be part of this webinar because we would like to have more and more services feeling comfortable, or it's not even feel comfortable, they're just having it as part of their normal practice, asking these questions to support all our clients. So yeah, really excited to be part of this and to share our experiences.
Hi, I'm Kylie Figan. I'm the Director of Programs at NUAA, the New South Wales Users and AIDS Association. I am here because I think it's extremely important that LGBTIQ people are able to access services in a way that is non-judgmental. And the only way we're going to improve the sectors is by doing stuff like this and questioning how we run our services and why we do the things we are, and to be able to understand the needs of LGBTIQ people. And likewise with Holly, I'm very passionate about lived experience and peer workers and how we better support people in those spaces.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. And sorry, I did say 5 women. We have had an apology from our other speaker, Sarah Etta from Illawarra Local Health District. So thank you. So just before I go on, so after the presentation, there will be question and answer session, and you'll be able to submit a question at any time during the webinar. To do so, please type the question in the Q&A box at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. And you may need to move your cursor or tap the touch screen to be able to see it. We are recording this seminar. You would have seen the notification, and it will go up on the NUAA website, and we do encourage you to share it with your colleagues. So I will just go back to share the screen again to the presentation. And I was just going to say a few words. So as I said, I'm Robert from NUAA. I'm the Deputy CEO here, and I'm passionate about improving services for the gender and sexuality diverse community as well, and working with our members to do that. So why are we doing it? For many reasons. So in the National Drug Strategy, people identifying as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender and intersex are identified as a priority population. And we know that our community uses illicit drugs more often, drinks alcohol at riskier levels, and also smokes at higher levels than the general community. So the recent NUAA advocate talked to consumers about access and equity issues. And so we had some comments from Marianne, a transgender woman, who talked about services needing to be more LGBTI friendly, like put up posters or displays to indicate their service is inclusive and celebrates diversity. And she also talked about being more progressing and catering to people of different gendered background, such as having non-binary sleep areas, toilets and showers, which have made her feel more comfortable and included as part of the service. We also commissioned a study through UNSW looking at access and equity. And Henry felt that it was harder for someone who's being gay to stick through the program and get through it without feeling like a minority within a minority and feeling left out by his peers. So NCEDA recently put out the National Workforce Survey results. And one of the questions they asked was, thinking about training, professional development on working with particular client groups, what are the gaps for you personally? And so 42% of the AOD workforce nationally reported that they'd like to improve their capacity to work with lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex and queer clients. And I think the sample of that was 1,000. So there's a lot of workers that are wanting some support in this area. And did you know that 15% of the New South Wales non-government AOD sector identify as LGBTI? And that was again validated in the national sample where 14% is identified. And so today's webinar is proudly brought to you by the Gender and Sexuality Diverse AOD Worker Network. And there's more information about that network on the NUAA website there. So part of today is talking about the importance of asking the question. And last year, the United Nations put out international guidelines on human rights and drug policy. And so as part of the implementation, they specifically talk about data collection with sexual orientation and gender identity being something that is important for any drug and alcohol treatment service. So in 2015-16, NUAA introduced gender and sexuality items into NUAA base. So whilst not a requirement from the AHW for the National Minimum Data Set, we felt that it was important, and we worked with ACON to develop some questions to put in there. So these are the questions relating to sex and gender. And here's a bit of data. So since 2016, 99% of clients are recorded as either male or female, but the proportion of other has increased up to sorry, I can't see it on my screen, from 0.3 to 0.4 since we first introduced those. And since we first introduced those questions, 6 members had clients that identified as transgender, intersex or non-binary, to today, where 26 members have now had recordings of genders other than male or female. In terms of sexuality, these are the sexuality questions that are in database. And here you can see that since 2016, 68% of clients have had their sexuality data recorded, but 37% of those were not stated or inadequately described. And that's part of the reason what we have today, why we're doing today, is because we're wanting to support workers to feel confident to be able to ask the questions. And you can see down the bottom of the remaining that where the question was asked, 4% identified as lesbian or gay, 2% were bisexual, and 0.3% were queer. So I'm now going to hand you over to Claire, who's our next speaker. Take it away, Claire.
Thanks, Robert. You wanted me to talk about language and data and the importance of collecting this. So language is super important, both in what we say and also what we don't say. Language has the power to welcome and include and support people, or conversely, it can erase, isolate, and make people unsafe. Society has systemically erased and discriminated and marginalised LGBTQ people, many of them for decades, if not centuries. And that has led to minority stresses that builds up over time. And minority stress has meant that the LGBTQ population has higher levels of poor mental health, avoidance of help-seeking behaviours and care services more broadly, a distrust of mainstream services, and overall they wear the higher burden of health disparities compared to the rest of the population. So this includes within the alcohol and other drugs field as well. So we do know that they have a higher rate of alcohol and drug use than the general population, but most of them use it in a non-problematic way. And while there are similarities in the reasons for use, there's also unique patterns of use that the LGBTQ communities use, such as chemsex. So what do we know about the population? We know they're roughly 11% of the community. And if we're not seeing this representation in our client cohorts, then they're still there, they're just not telling you, or we don't know. 71% of LGBTQ people won't reach out to a crisis service such as Lifeline in a crisis, and that's because of the inherent distrust of mainstream services. 34% hide their identity when accessing services, and 25% have been refused service because of their gender identity or sexual orientation. So the act of asking these questions in a culturally appropriate way demonstrates far more to the community than the simple question would indicate. By asking around someone's gender identity and sexual orientation, you're actively showing that their identity is important to you. You demonstrate that your understanding of gender and sexuality is beyond the binary concept of man, woman, and straight relationships. It allows your service to adapt the response you have to the individual client to be trauma-informed and person-centred rather than using a cookie-cutter approach. And it flags your organisation as inclusive. But it goes beyond the individual person that you're looking at. By having these conversations and collecting this data, a societal change can also occur. It normalises the conversations about gender and sexuality and makes it no longer taboo. It educates staff, visitors, and other clients about the spectrum of identities that exist in our communities. It allows the collection of data and research into how different communities use drugs, participate in risk-taking behaviours, and respond to different support options. And it determines for us the best practice for the LGBTQ community. So how do we do this? Well, Database has the questions there for you. But think about your intake forms. Ask about gender identity, or do you need to know sex assigned at birth? Ask about sexual orientation, but ensure you're not limiting it to the binary of male and female, or man and woman. Ask what you need to know. For example, if you need to match their Medicare name and gender in order to receive funding or put into your database, ask that. Separate the bureaucratic questions from the person's identity. And always allow people to not respond or have a not listed above option where they can self-identify using the language that they're most comfortable with in identifying. But don't stop at your intake forms. It goes much, much beyond that. It's an ongoing conversation with your clients and service users. Keep the door open for people to disclose. The community will be inherently distrustful of mainstream organisations, and that's because of their own barriers to accessing care. They're also in a vulnerable situation when they're seeking care. So while you might ask it on an intake form, until that trust is developed, people may not feel in a position that they're safe enough to disclose to you. So if you use open-ended language and don't make judgments and keep showing these cues that being LGBT is fine and accepted and welcome here, then you're more likely to have this population disclose. So when you're thinking about support systems, ask who's important to the client rather than assuming they're in a heterosexual relationship or that their biological family is still part of their lives or that they only have one partner. When assessing risk-taking behaviours, consider that the LGBT community has different sexual practices and behaviours, and don't ask these questions of only people that you assume are part of the community. Ask them of everyone. When thinking about residential services, be mindful and ask what name and pronoun and gender identity people use and ensure that their privacy is maintained. And when referring someone to another service, be mindful and ask them which name, gender and pronouns they would like in that introduction to the other service. What we find is most of the squeamishness in asking these questions are within the staff themselves, and it comes from their own fears and nerves of making a mistake. But making a mistake's okay. We all do it, but making assumptions isn't. And it's much harder to correct yourself when you've misgendered someone for an extended period than it is to ask up front. Okay, so how do we do this? Practice. It is new, it is novel, and the language is changing and evolving. You must practice. Get support. Pride in Health and Wellbeing is here for support. That's our core business. We will support your organisations in becoming more inclusive. Measure the impact of your change, not only through Database, but through, say, the free benchmarking survey that we provide that gives you year-on-year progress in your inclusive results. And we also survey your staff in their comfort levels in providing inclusive care, as well as the impact on your service users as well, giving you that 360-degree feedback. And what we want you to do is be loud and visible in your inclusion stance so that the community knows unequivocally how they'll be treated should they disclose and before they come to you for assistance. And should they disclose, they will know that they will be treated with respect and dignity and in a culturally appropriate way. So the impact of asking these questions is much, much greater than the 2 seconds it takes to ask. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was fantastic. And I think we'll hopefully get to some Q&A at the end to unpack some of that if any participants have any questions for Claire or any of the panel members. So I'm now going to hand you over to Holly and Simone, who are going to interview each other about their own experiences.
Okay. Sorry, my computer keeps clicking. I don't know if anyone else can hear it. Anyway, so Holly, were you asked gender and sexuality questions when you were assessed for AOD treatment?
No, I wasn't. When I accessed services, I was presumed to be cisgender, and I was presumed to be heterosexual, and I was presumed to be monogamous.
What? How did it come out as part of your treatment then? If you weren't asked, how did you forget?
Yeah, well, I'm a polyamorous person, which means that sometimes I have more than one romantic or sexual partner, and I'm a pansexual person, which means that I'm attracted to people of all genders. And I have 2 partners, Catherine and Brett. So I guess the person who I was seeing must have assumed I was gay if I'd mentioned Catherine first, or straight if I'd mentioned Brett first. And then maybe eventually after 3 or 4 sessions, I must have mentioned the other partner, and then it would have become evident that I was a polyamorous person, hopefully evident that I was doing ethical non-monogamy instead of non-ethical non-monogamy. But I think it was kind of lots of gaps and silences in that communication. And so I never ended up bringing up my difficult feelings about the gender binary or shared any nuances about my gender identity or my pansexual sexuality, because I guess I was weighing up how relevant is it. And yeah, and that wasn't the worst, but I would have appreciated the chance to flag it and move on if I was asked.
Well, did it change the experience for you, did you think, of your service, of your treatment?
Yeah, a little bit. I think, yeah, better out than in. And I guess I wonder if disclosure was a product for me of feeling safe from judgment in the relationship, or if actually disclosing and then having the person that I was working with handle it really well, maybe that was what helped with the therapeutic rapport. And I guess by handle it well, what I mean is not completely ignoring it, but not making everything about it either. Like being open to talking about if I thought it was relevant and being up for taking my guidance if I didn't think it was relevant.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the person I was working with handled it pretty well, but by not asking the questions outright, it did kind of put it on me to try to navigate, and it made which is just kind of one more thing to be worried about at the start of a relationship where there are all kinds of other worries and fears that service users have to navigate when accessing services.
Yeah, it sounds like the thing that wasn't said or something at first for a bit or something like that. But
yeah, totally.
What could the service have done differently, or is there any advice you'd like to give other AOD service providers about this question, about these questions?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm a big fan of asking the question, so I'd say do that. But then also maybe say, depending on what their answer is, you know, I'm wondering if there's anything that feels important to say about that. Maybe it's an important to explore in creating a therapeutic relationship. So many sexual of transphobia is paramount. Oh no, my connection is unstable.
Yeah, your connection is a bit unstable.
I'm sorry, are you having trouble hearing me?
We are. Perhaps if you turn your camera off, I know it's not ideal, but just while you're talking.
No, that's a great idea. Sorry,
Great.
gang.
We can hear you now. That's great.
Sorry, gang. So yeah, I guess, where am I going with this? Yeah, just be guided by the person about whether it's important to talk about or not. And then, you know, more broadly, think about allocating some money in your next budget to pay some lived experience folk to work on something strategic in your organisation, because just generally co-production, I think, pays dividends all round. You know, ask them to come up with some proposals for quality improvement projects, or tell them all about how your service evaluates itself, and ask how service users could be more candid in their feedback. And yeah, if you're not already doing these things, give it a try. Start somewhere. Pay them the same hourly rate as the people that they'll be in the room with, and then put them in the room with the decision makers. And yeah, think about introducing lived experience positions on your board or in your governance structures, because I think the effect on cultural change is really profound. And I know that many of you here have lived experience and work from that perspective, but I reckon identified roles are still very rare, and I really think that should change, because I think we challenge stigma and discrimination and epistemic injustice far more effectively if we make more and more identified roles, folks who are out by the definition of their job title to their colleagues and to their service users about their lived experience. So yeah, there's Holly's hot takes.
That was really helpful. Thank you, Holly.
Thanks so much. Hey, I'm going to keep my camera off while I'm asking you some questions.
Yeah, no problems.
So I'm curious about what advice and support you offered your team on asking gender and sexuality questions.
We do lots of training at Noffs. I'm really fortunate actually working at this place. It's one of the best places I've had that worked at for training their staff, which is good. So we do like quarterly, what we call clinical forums, where the counsellors from all over Noffs come, and we do some intensive training, and we've incorporated it into that. When we have new staff come, we go through the assessment process with the staff and talk to them about each parts of the assessment process and why these parts are important. And so and we offer a lot of supervision for the team and for the staff around their clients and asking these questions and talking them through things like that. It's because it's part of the assessment process. It's kind of starting to become sort of, I suppose, like sort of just the norm for our staff. It's just included. It's part of the whole thing. It's not anything separate or different. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah, nice. So I'm curious, what happens at your service if a person discloses, or after you've asked that and they've shared their answer?
I think the most important thing is around providing providing a safe space for the young person, but also being guided by the young person. So the young person, we offer, like, you know, we ask if they offer need any further additional support. If they do, we support them with that. But otherwise, it's just treating it as part of their normal, as part of treatment. You know, it's guided by the young person. They might want to have a talk to us about things, or they might not want to at that stage, and then that's fine as well. But I think the important thing is that, you know, we've asked and we've responded in a safe way. So the young person, if they want to talk about it later on, they can, or if you know, if things come up later on, they feel safe and that they're able to.
Yeah, nice. So I'm wondering, what does your service do if it can't meet the specific needs of a person who identifies as gender or sexuality diverse?
Oh, well, we have lots of good relationships with people all over the community, so we're kind of pretty lucky there. So we do refer on a lot, I think. And about just acknowledging that if we don't meet the needs, that it's about the young person's treatment and referring them to where else to do, but also might not necessarily mean providing, like us referring them on. We might just need to ring up to get some support for our clinicians to support the young person as well. So it could be either way. So but there's also, I think sometimes there's a bit of an assumption that we can't meet the needs, but if we're training our staff and working with our staff, then we should be, you know, we should be able to meet most needs as well, I think.
Yeah, nice. So what kind of practice tips would you be given to AOD workers?
Simone, I think you might have frozen as well. I'm not sure if you can hear us, but if you could possibly turn off your camera as well, it might improve the quality.
Okay, am I back?
You're back. Thank you.
This is the part of the online thing, isn't it? Should I turn my camera off as well?
Perhaps if we give that a try.
I'll give it a go. Sorry, everyone. Where were we up to before it cut out? Because I was talking and I don't know how long I was talking.
We didn't. No, that's great. We didn't get the start of your question, so I'll just ask again. What kind of practice tips are you thinking you'd like to share with AOD workers?
I think that what is it around making these questions second nature, like including them in part of everyone's assessment process, so it's not like it's anything different, I think is a really helpful tool, and it's helpful because it creates this, like, it's just part of services processes, just like all the other questions that we ask. Also, but around making sure we're creating that safe space, so displaying posters and resources and stuff for young people around, and explaining it when working with the young person, making sure we're explaining like confidentiality and what that means and things like that, so the young person is feeling safe. Having a good contact of networks and attending training is important, and looking at our own language. Like, don't just assume is always the biggest thing that I think with any kids that we work with, no matter what. Don't just assume is a good way to go by, within that, don't just assume, don't just assume because we're asking the question and something comes up, we have to like rush to provide anything different. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case, but it's just about creating the safe space for the young person to have this discussion and making sure that the young person feels that the service is, like, our service is able to, like, is going to be accepting no matter what the answer is of these questions. Because asking these kind of questions, like I said, helps assist in creating a safe space for these young people. I also think in terms of the culture of your workplace, making sure you do have like a zero tolerance policy with you in terms of the culture of your workplace, because if a young person walks in and the culture's not the great, and if you ask these questions, they're going to pick up on that, and they're not going to feel safe.
Yeah, sure. So speaking of asking the question, somebody's asked us about the words that you use or that you recommend staff use. They've said, but how do you ask the questions in the assessment? How is it worded?
Yeah.
Are you up for sharing a bit about that while we're on the topic?
I think, I don't know, I don't know if it's because, and I could be doing it wrong, so I'm not going to say I'm doing it right either at all. So I just sort of ask, well, it's, what do you identify as, or what do you like to identify as, or what, that's like asking just straight out like that. A lot of the times the young people the young people we work with by you asking that question, it means that you're creating this safe space already for it, and then they feel like they can just make their answer. So I think a lot of the time the fear is on us as workers in thinking that it's going to somehow impugn the therapeutic relationship, and a lot of the times the young person isn't overly. It doesn't scare them off. If anything, I think it helps. Because then you can actually go, okay, well, do you need any support around that? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that? And even if the young person, they're just identifying as a straight male, asking those questions, I think as well, helps create a safe, it helps create a culture for other young people that this sort of stuff is like asking these questions and being part of this stuff and having services inclusive of everyone is okay. So I think it kind of helps create a better attitude as well for other young people as well, Yeah,
I agree. Hey, Simone, thanks for interviewing each other. That was great.
Thanks.
Great, thank you both. And that was really useful and definitely a lot of practice tips for workers there. And Emma, I hope I flashed up those questions as well to respond to your question of what we include in database. So next I will hand over to Kylie.
Hi, I'll turn my camera off just to save any potential issues. So what I'm going to talk about is an experience I had in another job I've held that really, for me, highlights the importance of not only asking the question, but the reasons we ask it and how we continue to support people in that space. I was working at another organisation, and it was the program was a dual diagnosis program for young people, and so it was a mixed disciplinary team. It was counsellors and art therapists and caseworkers. And, during intake and assessment, the question wasn't being asked. And throughout, as I grew into the role and got to know my colleagues better, and through providing supervision and going through client lists, these discussions were being had. And I was also at the same time connecting with some of the clients as they'd come into the space. It was an open plan office, and I'm openly queer, and so it was connecting. Some of them would come to me for that connection. So as I unpacked the why we weren't asking the question and how we could, some of the reasons, I wanted to understand why the team wasn't, what they thought of it. And as has been highlighted throughout this webinar, it was fear of offending. It was, one of the responses was, well, it's not relevant. It's not going to change how I interact with them and the service I'm providing them. Or, why would it shape why do I need to ask them that, basically? It was the fear of offending or saying it wrong. And that really does put the onus then on the young people to speak up, or to articulate their needs. And silence creates a space for too many things to happen, I think. So in this process, I continue to unpack it with the team and try and explore why it was important. And through that process, we undertook training. We utilized the NADA resources and went down this path of providing that support, asking the question, and not even an intake and assessment. At this point, we're talking about clients that they'd been seeing for some time, being able to have these discussions with them. And one of the clients in particular, and there were several clients that this really shaped the way they engaged, and more importantly, how they were able to, navigate their own life and understand some of the services that could support them and the things that oppress them and internalized stigma and all those things. There was a young trans woman who'd been coming and going to the service for sort of some time, and had ongoing issues with housing, and was at that time couch surfing with friends, and wasn't really getting the support they needed through mainstream housing support. And the counsellor / caseworker that was working with them was kind of at their wit's end. So during supervision, we talked about this, and I asked them if they knew about the gender centre, and a whole lot of stuff. So they then started to talk to the client about this, and turns out the client had been working with the gender centre throughout the years and was really keen to reconnect, wasn't sure how, and wasn't sure of the services provided. So the counsellor went and met with people from the gender centre, and they started to co-case manage this young person. And really, the priority for this young person, as articulated by them, was to get secure housing. That was their priority at the time. And the location was really important to them due to some family issues around their gender and sexuality and intergenerational trauma. There was a whole lot of stuff going on for them. So through this process of providing that support, having those conversations, providing a safe space, so many things came out. But ultimately, the outcome was that through the gender centre working with their caseworker, they were able to find appropriate housing for this young person in an area that was suitable for them, and also provide the ongoing support that they required to stay in that housing. And then as a consequence, address some of the other issues they wanted to address in their life. And it really just, changed the way that they engaged with our service. But more importantly, they were able to find support that was suited to their needs, and that was honest and nuanced. And the counsellor came back to me, and they were one of the biggest they were like, oh no, we don't need to ask this question. At the beginning, they were the most reluctant, I guess you could say, and all for the best of intentions, who turned around and said, wow, I get it. Like, I never, ever would have thought that these things could have such an impact. And just because I'm heterosexual and cisgendered doesn't mean that I can understand the needs of my clients who don't identify or who aren't that. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to share that as one of many examples of, the importance of asking this question, but, really being client-led around their needs and upskilling yourself, and, that the organisation, the agencies we work in have those mechanisms to be able to do it in a meaningful way. And, just echo what's been said by my other panel members here today, really.
Great. Thank you so much, Kylie. That was really useful to hear about how that's been applied, and some success stories that have come from asking the question. So we have finished the panel a bit early because we're missing one of our speakers today, although I think a lot of the content has already been covered in terms of what Sarah was going to speak to. So we will open it up now to questions and answers from participants. So if you wanted to get into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and we'll open it up to the panel to answer your questions. So while we're waiting, I mean, I have spoken to the AHW about whether there is a view to include gender and sexuality items in the National Minimum Data Set. And certainly there is movement at AHW across all of their data sets. and they did indicate that would be starting with gender. At the moment, it's sex that's asked within the minimum data set. So I think there is a move at the national level to explore, and I think their intent is to pilot some of that with particular jurisdictions. And of course, New South Wales has put our hand up to test it out, seeing as we've already added those questions into database.
Just going on the previous question that was asked about how you ask the questions, asking someone how they identify, so how do you identify your gender and how do you identify your sexuality, is all you need to ask. They will then give you the answer that's most appropriate to them. So it don't have to overthink the questions. And like I sort of said, ask what you need to know. If I need to know what's on your Medicare card, then tell me that. If I need to know what's on your birth certificate, then ask that. If I need to know how I'm addressing you as an individual, then ask that.
Beautiful, thanks Claire. So we've got a question from Jamie. So Jamie's asked, what are the common barriers that you've come across while working with these clients? No, Kylie or Simone, did you want to take that one? So some of the common barriers.
When we're when working with the clients that identify as LGBT, are you saying AQI, or is it just in general, or
I think it's with gender and sexuality diverse clients. Yeah. Okay.
So I think that they're particularly, I think that some of the common barriers that we're coming up with is that when the questions don't ask you're up, like there's no, it's what Holly sort of said before as well, there's no safe space, like there's just that another barrier that they've kind of put in front. And quite often, sometimes for a young person, if we find that you haven't sort of asked the question, they can be a bit more shy and a bit like they're not participating in as much, particularly say if it's like, so that's if it's in the group context and things like that, they're just not feeling as, you can just tell they just don't feel as comfortable. Whereas if we've created a service where it's safer for them, it's a lot more accepting, you can actually just even see like on their face, like their interaction and just how much better they feel. They can actually physically even see the difference.
I also think we can't underestimate the impact that homophobia and transphobia has on us as individuals and a community, and the multitude of ways that plays out for us as individuals. So if we aren't acknowledging that, or even whether it's explicitly said, if we're not even in that room, how can we connect the dots? I think that's a huge area. How can we start to address some of those issues? Because a lot of LGBTIQ people, a lot of the issues that we face are due to homophobia. It's due to erasure of our identity. It's due to growing up in a heteronormative society. So I think, that within itself takes down one of many barriers, and you can then start to unpack that trauma.
I think like these questions lead to conversations about, acceptance of self and peers and others in your family, and even conversations about, safe sex with same gender partners and all that sort of stuff as well. Like something that might not be covered in mainstream services. A lot of the kids that we work with that might go to school and stuff like that, like a lot of that stuff might not be covered there. So us talking about that helps with that as well. So it's allowing a safe space for the conversations, so that kind of and discussions.
And I think the biggest barrier is the staff's own squeamishness to ask questions, because we've definitely done research and found that in the majority of instances, when people have been asked and disclosed in a health or care setting, the impact has been good. It's either neutral or positive to their care, because it's either not related or you've demonstrated the fact that you're an inclusive organisation. So either way, the barriers are going to go down a bit, the personal fears are going to go down, the fight or flight reflex is going to go down, and the comfort levels and engagement is going to increase.
I think it's even similar, like where a lot of mainstream services might not ask questions about drug and alcohol to clients. It's a similar sort of concept when you think about it like that. In some ways, like not asking those questions there kind of leads to those, like to drug and alcohol clients having barriers to treatment. It's a similar sort of concept.
Absolutely. And I mean, as we saw from the national survey, I mean, the AOD workforce is wanting to improve their skills and their confidence in this area, which is really heartening to see that in the recent survey. And NUAA has worked with ACON on developing an e-learning package, which is available on our website, which has got some nice videos for you to use as part of your induction and orientation with new staff or with existing staff to look at how we can build skills and confidence to ask the question. So we did have a comment also from someone that's saying that they appreciate the idea when engaging people utilising services of asking who is most important to you, as opposed to asking something like, do you live with your mum and your dad? And I think that's really great about keeping it really open and creating the opportunity for people to then talk about what's important to them or who's part of their lives, which is really great.
Mm. Yeah, questions that centre one experience, and when you don't have that experience, you have to put yourself in the position of another. I know it's subtle, but it just is the experience of people of diverse genders and sexualities to just feel like the gap or silence, or feel like the odd one out. And so, yeah, the more open the question, the more relevant to everyone, the more we start to challenge, you know, homophobia and transphobia in every conversation, in just the little interactions that we have on the daily.
Great. Holly, you, as part of the Q&A with Simone, you talked about getting someone with lived experience to come into a service to, you know, look at doing a QI project or something like that. Have you been part of anything like that where where you've come into an AOD service or a mental health service to do such an activity?
I reckon that's a lot of where the peer workforce starts, like in the absence of having, you know, big budgets for peer support work or lived experience roles. The way to kind of plant the seed of that culture is to start some lived experience projects, or, you know, some projects that are co-produced that bring in that lived experience knowledge. And yeah, I've mostly been involved in those things in mental health, and there's a kind of it's interesting, different countries have a kind of have more or less of a lived experience workforce in mental health or drug and alcohol. And of course, we all know that the two are often inextricably linked. So it's kind of wild that our services sometimes operate in silos. So yeah, my experience has mostly been around the expansion of the lived experience workforce in mental health. And I can say that that's a really good strategy. Where it starts is, yeah, if you don't have enough money for a whole lived experience worker to be working with you all year round, start with just pulling in a team of a couple of different people. I think it's helpful to have a few people, because the consumer perspective or service user perspective is not homogenous. So yeah, try and get a few lived experience reps, make sure that they're of diverse genders and sexualities and classes and cultural backgrounds. And then, yeah, figure out what is the strategic priority for your organisation, and then ask them, how would you be doing this? Or even ask them, do you agree that this is the strategic priority for our organisation? And so, yeah, I think then that starts to get some runs on the board, and it shows what amazing things can happen when you build relationships. Because I think, unfortunately, the relationships between workers and service users have a bit of power asymmetry, and that means that we're not collaborating as when I'm receiving the therapy or the treatment. But in co-production, then you are collaborating. So then that helps challenge stigma and discrimination too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Holly. And Claire, you also talked about, you talked about Pride in Health and Wellbeing, which NUAA is a member of, and we're a silver employee because we like to practice what we preach here at NUAA. So there's like the rainbow tick, which we know, we investigated, and it's quite costly for service to do. So that can sometimes be a barrier to services that are really wanting to make change to be more inclusive. So what other strategies would you recommend for services that possibly, are cash short and don't have money to invest, but how they can look to build their capacity to create a change in their culture around inclusion?
Absolutely. There are free options out there. Our national benchmarking index is free for anyone to participate in, and it gives you that 360-degree feedback from the staff perspective, from the service user perspective, as well as the work you're doing. So it makes a really good gap analysis to be able to say, here's what we know is best practice. What are we currently doing in our organisation, and where are there some holes? And it just gives you some ideas of where to start in many instances as well. The rainbow tick framework, absolutely, that's the gold standard. But like you said, it's quite a in-depth process to be able to receive accreditation, but doesn't mean you can't work towards the standards. And they're available on the Rainbow Tick website as well. There's a lot of great resources online that you can use to increase cultural competency and staff awareness. And a combination of all of these will be needed to be able to move the whole organisation forward. A one-off training session, while it's great, it is just a one-off training session. And any new staff you get, any questions you have, or anyone that doesn't fit the norm of that training session won't then be accepted. So it's got to come with staff training, visual representation, changes to your forms, and continuous quality improvement, as well as that staff development. It's got to be throughout your whole client life cycle. So we are available to support you, but we are a member-based, which means fee-for-service organisation. And there are others out there, but more than happy to share resources. And there are some on our website if you need some free resources as well.
Thanks, Claire. So we don't have any more questions coming through, so I might throw around to see if there is anything any panel members came in today wanting to communicate to the alcohol and other drug sector that they haven't had an opportunity to talk about just yet.
I'll give you my final thoughts then.
Definitely
approach it as a whole of organisation approach. Inclusion needs to be part of everyone's role. It's not just to a diversity and inclusion team. It's not just to the direct care staff. It's got to be from the top down and the bottom up, which sounds so cliched, but it does need to be part of absolutely everyone's role, and understanding how that will impact the lives of your clients and your service users needs to be the driving force. The why are we doing this? So yes, you can put the greatest questions on intake forms, but if staff don't understand the why we're asking, then the flow on benefits won't happen, or they will respond in an inappropriate way if someone answers the question and discloses that they're gender or sexuality diverse. So definitely everyone's role, everyone has eyes, everyone can be advocates, and everyone can be allies.
Brilliant, thank you. Did any other panel member have anything they wanted to add before we wrap up a bit early? No, that's okay. Before we go, I will just flash up some resources that are available. So in partnership with NUAA and Central and Eastern Sydney Primary Health Network, ACON developed some AOD LGBTIQ inclusive guidelines for treatment providers, which are available on the NUAA website and really useful for any AOD provider who's wanting to look at more inclusive practice. Again, I talked about that e-learning module. E-learning modules are free on the NUAA website. It doesn't matter if you're a NUAA member or you're not. They're available for free. And it's just an interactive way that you can share with your team to get them to build their skills and confidence. And it gives you the why. Why are we asking these questions as well? There's a link to the Rainbow Tick and the Pride and Health Wellbeing programs, as well as the Health and Wellbeing Equality Index that Claire referred to. And just finally, if you're wanting to get in contact with a panel member, or if you identify as gender and sexuality diverse AOD worker, please join our network. And you can do that via feedback@nada.org.au. Or if you're wanting to get more information about using the gender and sexuality items in NADAbase, please contact NADAbase support@nada.org.au. So I would like to take this opportunity. So we do have another question. So someone said, brilliant, thank you. You're very welcome. So I would like to thank all of the panel members who have taken their time today to share their views and their experiences with you. So thank you very much. Our next webinar is on the 23rd of October, and it is in partnership with NADA members and the New South Wales Ministry of Health. And we'll be hearing about a feasibility study examining smart recovery's routine outcome measurements, as well as an evaluation of DBT for young people in residential treatment. So please go to the NADA website to register for that. And thank you very much for joining us.